the African Commission Working Group on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Justice Mohamed Abdel Salam from Egypt. And then we shall have presentations around the right to water, around the right to education, around the right to health, relating to the state of affairs, relating to public services in those various sectors. And then we shall have a lengthy plenary. We are planning to have a lot of time for plenary, where we hope that we shall hear from almost everybody on this call to be able to give their suggestions about the way forward, what needs to be done in order to improve the situation. And then at the end of the day, we shall have an outcome document. Our colleague, Alana Kembabazi, will be working on an outcome document for the meeting, and then it will be shared with all of you. So without further ado, I would want to call upon Justice Mohamed Abdel Salam from Egypt. Justice Mohamed is representing the African Commission Working Group on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and is going to just give some remarks about what has been happening within the African Commission, but also saying something general about the obligation of states to provide quality social services. Justice Mohamed, I'm handing to you. If possible, you can put on your video and you speak to us.
Okay, thank you very much, Salima. Can you hear me well? Okay.
Yes, I hear you very clearly.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all, distinguished participants and colleagues. First, I would like to start by expressing my appreciation for the kind invitation for our presence today in order to discuss this matter. Definitely one of the most standing topics for our continent now is how to ensure human rights protection. And in the light of the market circumstances, trends for privatization and decreased financial abilities and expected on situations such as the COVID-19 pandemic, it became very important to start to think how governments shall protect human rights in the light of such economic circumstances. In fact, COVID-19 pandemic revealed how our public services and health system and how we are ensuring the protection of such social services are not strong enough and needs a lot of work and development. And also it revealed how a lot of countries do not have a proper system to protect women and vulnerable groups within such circumstances. Therefore, within the last meetings, within the experts committee discussions in Senegal, South Africa, and also our virtual meetings, we talked a lot about how to ensure the protection of human rights in the light of such circumstances, and in particular, who shall have the full responsibility and who's the main responsibility to protect human rights in such circumstances, and indeed it's the state. We discussed what the state should do and what are the challenges, and how human rights shall be protected anyways, regardless of what economic circumstances led to privatization, etc. Because what we observed from several reports was in different countries that usually privatizations can lead to less providing of public services, and mainly providing services for the people who have the ability to pay or have the ability to access such services, and not for public as it should be. However, the main goal of the state is not to get profit. The main goal of the state is to protect the public basic rights And therefore, when it even goes into privatization, the main goal is to ensure that such services will be provided in a better way. Therefore, we discussed some of what the state should do. The state should issue laws and regulations to ensure that state responsibilities are clear in how they are going to protect human rights, even when they are doing any contracts or entering into any agreements with any private entities. And also not just delegating all the state obligations into private entities without proper supervision. And also we have within the African Union several international instruments that protect human rights in a perfect way. However, the problem is not fully abiding by it. So also we are trying to see how we can ensure abiding by the international obligations, and in the particular African Union soft law instruments, in order to be adopted within the national law of each country in order to fully abide by it. Also, we discussed several matters related to how to review the current policies and how to ensure the engagement of the legislative authority, administrative authority, and civil society organizations and think tanks, universities, in order to ensure that there will be a public participation, that all state entities work hand in hand to ensure the protection of human rights. And just due to time limitations, we discussed also the challenges and mainly the financial constraints. And we realized that several countries can, and Egypt, for example, they adopted a constitutional obligation on the state to fund a specific percentage to public health services, etc. However, we can see from some experiences within the continent that they do not really abide by such financial guarantees. So we are also talking about how to ensure the role of other actors like judiciary, civil society, in order to ensure that the state administration shall abide by the financial allocations for such social services. Also to ensure that there will be proper legislation, how the state should issue several legislations and laws in order to ensure that they are going to have the upper hand and the proper supervision above all private entities. And finally, we discussed the challenge of enforcement and how we all know that human rights, basic rights are the state's full responsibility and cannot be delegated and cannot be underestimated under any circumstances, and how we should focus on the idea of enforcement. Finally, within the discussions of today, I'm sure we'll be able to outline more points, detailed points on how we can tackle such issue. And within the experts committee, we can, there are several members here. We can present what we concluded during the last meetings, and then we contribute within it and reach better solutions. Thank you, Salim.
Thank you very much, Judge Mohammed, for outlining the discussions that have been going on around the African Commission and what is happening on the continent regarding public services. Now, I would want us to get into, before we get into the next discussion, just to mention that as Judge Mohammed was finalizing, he said, we shall be able to speak a little bit about what has been happening with the Working Group on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We shall talk about it during the plenary, and we shall be able to give you some further details around a general comment that is being drafted by the African Commission around the state obligation to regulate private providers involved in social service delivery, but also that general comment outlines, it clarifies the state obligations to provide quality public services. So we shall speak a little bit more about that general comment as we go forward. But I would want us now to get into some of the substance. And I will start with Professor Ebenezer Durojaye from the Dula Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape to make a presentation around the right to water and what is happening with public services in the water sector. Professor Ebenezer, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Salima, and good day to everyone. In the next few minutes, I will just highlight some of those issues relating to the right to water and also discussing some of the challenges when it comes to private non-state actors' involvement in the water, either in the form of providing water or by way of also undermining access to water services, clean water services. I think before now, the issue whether right to water has been a recognized right has been a subject of debate, but that should be put behind us now. We've seen some non-standard coming both from the UN and the African regional system, highlighting the importance and relevance of the right to water as part of their socioeconomic rights. We recall that starting from the UDHR, which at some of the Article 25 mentions adequate standard of living, mentioning right to eat and food and other things, including, of course, water, up to Article 14 of the CEDAW, which specifically relates to urges state to provide assure access to water services for women in rural area. And of course, we have our Maputo Protocol, so Article 15, highlighting the right to water for women, that clean access to clean water, state has that obligation to ensure that access to clean water. So these are some of these specific instruments that mention the right to water. Beyond this, we've also have some, like I said, standard norms developing, clarifying the nature and the content of the right to water. We record that the UN General Assembly also affirmed that the right to water is an important right, recognized, and that must be ensured to everyone. And taking it forward, we have seen that over the year, the UN also has appointed a special rapporteur specifically to deal with that issue, realizing the importance of water to life as a right to life, and of course to other essential socioeconomic rights. There's this common saying that water is life, and that's very true when you look at how important water is to everyone. Apart from personal use, industrial use, hygiene use, we can barely survive without water as human beings. So that's why the right to water is very critical, in any discussion, and that's it's very important that it must be accessible, available to people, especially vulnerable and marginalized groups. The Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in its General Comment 15 also tried to clarify the content, nature of the right to water, highlighting states' obligation to ensure access to water, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized groups, ensuring that states must take the responsibility, even when non-state actors are involved, to ensure that they do not undermine access to water services for poor people, generally. And also, we are also seeing that some of those norms also include the guiding principle of business and human rights. It's a general principles developed by the special mechanism, one of the special mechanisms of the UN, which of course does not specifically relate to water, but of course relate to other socioeconomic rights issues like water, food, and services. Public services generally, that while private or non-state actors are involved in the supply of private of social services, then they have certain obligation in terms of ensuring that they do not undermine right access to those services. And that state, more importantly, also has to put in place very stringent mechanism to regulate the activities of non-state actors in supplying those services, including water. And more recently, we've seen the African Commission develop the guidelines on water, very important one. This is in addition to the Nairobi Principles, which was developed years back, relating to the implementation of the socio-economic rights in the African Charter, where it's also recognized the importance of the right to water, and that states has the obligation to ensure that it must be delivered on a non-discriminatory basis to everyone, particularly vulnerable and marginalized groups. This was re-echoed in that water guidelines. The water guideline is very, very specific in terms of the role of non-state actors, and that states must have the obligation to regulate activity of non-state actors in terms of water supply. And what we've seen over the years in relation to water supply in Africa has been that states, because of the failure of some of our governments, in order to ensure access to water services, have engaged private actors in the name of PPE, public-private initiatives, thereby surrendering the services, the rendering of services of water supply to private entities. And one of the challenges with this is that sometimes, most cases, people, very poor people, vulnerable and marginalized groups, disadvantaged groups in rural areas, in informal settlement, have had difficulties in accessing water. And like I earlier mentioned, that we know that water is life, and if it's difficult for people to access water, if they have to, we all know that the intention of non-state actors, private entities generally is to make profit. While we recognize that sometimes they play an important role in delivery of social services, but the criticality is that government should not surrender that responsibility entirely to non-state actors. Otherwise, it will be very problematic, as we have seen, in a period of COVID-19. Some of those communities, informal settlement, we work in Cape Town during COVID. We had some interview engagement with them, and they were expressing their frustration, their lamentation in terms of access to water services for hygiene, even for personal use in the home. It has always been a challenge for them to have access to basic amenities, including water. But COVID compounded the issue and made it more difficult because government could not supply water to their areas and makes it very difficult. And sometimes government engage private entities to do this. And some of these private entities do not supply water regularly, making it very difficult for people to access water. So it's a big, big issue, which I think state governments has this obligation. No matter the circumstance, where governments involve non-state actors in the supply of water services, they still retain that obligation. And that has been clearly made in General Comment 24 by the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Water Guideline by the African Commission, and some other standards that has also been, that have referred to earlier on. We know that states has the obligation to respect, to protect, and to fulfill socio-economic rights, including the right to water. And on no circumstance should that obligation be abdicated to a third party or transferred to a third party, as the case will be, especially in the case of water supply services. Another important area where we have also seen that the use of industrial water, we're seeing non-state actors, industries, making use of water. They require more water in order to function very well, and sometimes they take advantage of this to the detriment of people, the majority of people who will need water for personal use or for other services at home. So that's also a big challenge in terms of how industrial water is used by these private actors. The other also important issue has to do with how access to safe and very healthy water, and where the issue of pollution comes to play. We've seen private actors also, through their activities, making it difficult for people to have access to clean water in their areas. Most of these multinational companies, particularly oil companies or companies or mining companies, they make use of water, and sometimes through their activities, they tend to pollute water, making it difficult for people to access the water services. We remember that the Sarah case, which was brought before the African Commission, was particularly on that issue, where Shell, one of those multinational companies operating in Ogoni land, was involved in the water pollution, making it difficult for people who live on water, to have access to not only clean water, but even because all their lives depends on fishing, which makes it almost impossible for them to fish and to earn a living. So the Commission did emphasize that no matter what, that the state has the obligation to protect the right to food, the right to water in that case. And that obligation, the governments must put in place the necessary mechanism to ensure, to regulate the activities of non-state actors when they provide water, or so that the activities does not undermine the enjoyment of the right to water. In this case, it was a case of pollution, like I mentioned. We have also seen recently the Masibuko case in South Africa. It's a clear example how vulnerable marginalized people can also, rights to water can be undermined. We see in that case where it's a situation where a government entity decided to impose a meter for poor people living in PRI areas that they should now have to pay for use of water, where they were not previously used. Before that time, they were enjoying water without necessarily have to pay. But that new system introduced made it very difficult for them, and they went to court to challenge that. But unfortunately, the law. I think the important lesson for us is that it raises a big issue about involvement of vulnerable and marginalized groups in participating in the access to water. We're seeing that the decision to impose a fine or use of money for water, for using water, was not really, the people were not really carried along. And this is often what happens in our countries, where governments involve private actors to provide water services without necessarily thinking of how to involve people that will be affected, the vulnerable and marginalized group. So their voices are not even heard. They're not even part of the part of the deliberation or discussion that finally leads to the involvement of a non-state actor. And we all know that the right to participation is also a personal right. One of the important elements of the rights-based approach is that participation, people who will be affected by any decision by the state should be involved in that decision-making process, which is very crucial in terms of right to water. So I think, like I have said before, we're not saying that non-state actors do not have roles to play. They do, definitely, we know that, given the inefficiency in some of our government, given the issue of corruption in our governments. But at the same time, it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that the involving third party will not undermine the right to water. More importantly, there's a growing consensus to say that even third parties have some level of duty in terms of ensuring that the activity will not make it very difficult or impossible for people they want to provide services for, to have access to those services. So it's a very, very important one, and and I think just like Kasalima mentioned, there has been, especially in the African region, a current move to develop more non-standard on this issue, and the general comments is on the way, and I'm sure maybe later on someone will talk more about that. But I think the important thing for us is to realize that water services is critical for enjoyment, and in the COVID era, it became very, very problematic for people who are in rural area or informal settlement to have access. One of the things about prevention during COVID is that people must clearly wash their hands regularly. But in the informal settlement where they don't have access to water, they couldn't even observe that kind of hygiene as recommended to them. So it makes it very difficult, putting their life in danger, putting their life in danger as case may be. So the right to water, I said, it's right, it's life. What it also means is that when people are denied that access to water, either clean water or even for basic use, then their right to life will be also in danger by that kind of activity. So I think our state and government, based on their human rights commitment, at international level, at the African regional system, must really take it very seriously in terms of ensuring that they do the right thing in regulating and monitoring the activities of non-state entity when they are involved in either in the provision of water or monitoring the activities so that the activity will not even undermine access to clean water supply services. So I think for now, I will just stop and then I will wait to hear from other people.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ebenezer, first of all, for laying it out for us that there is no longer debate on whether there is a right to water, and for going through all those international and regional human rights instruments that do elaborate around the right to water, and for giving us the examples, restating the obligation of the state, but also mentioning that private involvement in the in service provision regarding water should not undermine the right to water. So for those of you who are on the call, please feel free to add anything you would want to the chat. And if you have a question, to put it in the chat for now. Like I said, we intend to have a long plenary session where we shall be having voices, suggestions around what needs to be done, but also for some of you who are able to give us more information around case studies, around examples of where these various rights are being affected. Like I said, we are looking to having coordinated advocacy on the continent around the issue of public services. So feel free to contribute to that debate for now. We are going to open plenary after all the speakers, and then we shall be able to hear from all of you. So next, I will call upon Clinton. Clinton Nyamongo is from Haki Jamii, and he's going to speak about the right to health and public services in health, as well as how that has been impacted by the involvement of private providers. Clinton, please, if you can, please put on your video.
Yes, good morning. I hope I can be heard. Thank you for the opportunity. Received greetings from Dr. Nicholas Brago, who's our Executive Director at Haki Jamii. We're located in Nairobi, and we work around issues of social and economic rights, and the core of that is the right to health. And so thank you for the opportunity. And the task that I have is basically to highlight the status of the right to health with regards to the key thematic area that we have been for our discussion today. And basically, the focus is on the right to health in Kenya, and how I want to maybe disseminate this short presentation. It's focusing on the right to health from the international perspective, the African perspective, and coming to Kenya, and problematizing it with how public services have been affected by privatization based on a research which we just concluded last year, November. And so we all agree that the right to health is quite critical, it's quite fundamental. And the World War II, 1945, when the United Nations was formed, it was essential that a new body was also formed, hence the 1946 conference that led to the formation of the World Health Organization in 1948. And coincidentally, last week on the 7th of April, we celebrated the World Health Day, whose theme was Our Planet, Our Health. And so that forms the foundation of today's maybe discussion, that health, right to health is quite fundamental. It is provided for in Article 12 of the ICESR, and also under the General Comment number 14 of 2000, it's provided for within the African region under Article 16 of the African Bantu Charter. It has been really codified. It's been really codified in most of the African constitutions, including the Kenyan Constitution under Article 43(1)A, which provides for the right to health, including sexual and reproductive rights. And when you look at the African perspective on how the right to health has been given quite some prominence, is the fact that under Article 16 is a normative provision is a provision on the right to health. You'll also notice that in 2011, there is a working group that codified the guidelines and principles on economic and social and cultural rights, and it gave heed to the right to health. As Justice Mohammed has highlighted, this right is quite critical in the discussion around social economic rights. And you also notice that Banjul, the Abuja Declaration also touched on the right to health, wherein, as I'll highlight later on, is that great budget. The states have been given an obligation to ensure that at least 15% of its budget is focused on the right to health. And then I would also have the SDGs, which most African countries aspire to achieve. There is the SDG number 3, which provides for the aspect of the right to good health, rather the aspiration to achieve good health and well-being. And then coming back to Africa, Agenda 2063 itself also places the importance of the Africa we want, which coincidentally is linked to the theme that we have today. And the first aspiration of Agenda 2063 actually is on promoting health and nutrition. So essentially, at the African level, we all have to agree that health is quite critical. And of course, this was during the COVID-19 pandemic when it broke out in around March 2020. And you could see the health system in Africa was in a bit of a strain, in as much as the COVID did not affect most African countries in a great scale as it affected other countries. African countries are running health scales to really look at what is the status of our public health facilities, what is the status of our private health facilities, how are we going to react to such pandemic in a large scale again. And so that is the importance of maybe highlighting we need to discuss the right to health. And so coming back home in Kenya, the right to health, as I had mentioned, is stamped under the Constitution, under Article 41, which provides that the right to health is a fundamental human right. And I think Article 5 and 6 that basically outlines the fact that all international laws which have been accepted to be part of the Kenyan law, they basically apply to be part of Kenyan law. And so that is why the international obligations, international conventions, international treaties which are related to the right to health apply to the Kenyan law. And the Constitution of Kenya has sort of divided or devolved the health function into the county government and the national government. And so the fourth schedule under the Constitution actually use the sharing of functions so that in as much as the national government the county government, which is more accessible to more people, is also given the function of implementing this health function. And so in Kenya, the health government of Kenya has been quite pro improving the status of the right to health. We all agree that the social economic rights are to be implemented in the states, or rather have the duty as the bearers to implement such rights. And in Kenya, we have.
Sorry, Johnston, I'm told that for everybody you're not very clear. So perhaps maybe you could try to turn off your video and we see if it will improve, or if there's something else that you can do to improve the voice.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes. So as I was saying, the Kenyan government has really tried to work with civil societies, and it has implemented certain policies that are promoting the right to health, which we have to give credit to. For instance, the Vision 2030, which is more on promoting certain aspirations, which include the right to health. Big Four agenda, which has affordable healthcare as one of its tenets. And most recently, the launch of the universal health coverage, wherein the government seeks to ensure that everyone has access to quality and affordable medical coverage, which is quite a good thing. In fact, most recently, when the budget was read, a great percentage of the budget was given to the right, rather to the health function. And we have to appreciate where we have come. That courts in Kenya have also been instrumental with various courts deciding that the right to health is justiciable, just following the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. And so, in as much as the right to health may not be realized to the full extent, we have to aspire to the same. And for instance, states and other actors have been encouraged to establish a right-based approach, and that's why we come in network to maybe promote advocacy around the same, so that healthcare is ensured, access to quality healthcare is ensured, so that healthcare and goods and services are ensured, are achieved. So coming to the gains that we can just highlight, I can just highlight is that number one, the justiciability to the right to health has been achieved in Kenya. That was not there previously from 2010. Then there has been commitment from both levels of government. There is the introduction of the Big Four agenda, the 2030 vision, and then there have been improved public-private partnerships. Then there has been privatization of healthcare. But of course, there are cons to these. There is massive corruption, which Kenyans noted during the COVID-19 era. And then there is this issue of privatization, which probably I'll maybe spend 2 minutes highlighting a certain research which we did. Justice Mohammed just highlighted that privatization can be a pro, it can also be a con to the promotion of the right to healthcare. And so last year, Batwan Hakijami developed a concept to try to look at this issue of privatization that came as a result of the COVID-19. We know that privatization has more of impeded accessibility to quality healthcare in Kenya. And so together with the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice in New York University, we delved to try to look at the impact of privatization of healthcare in Kenya. And our research was in two facets. There is a desk research, and we went into the field by identifying 3 counties in Nairobi, in Isiolo towards the north, and Mombasa towards the Kenyan coast. We did interviews around the same thing to discover what privatization has done. Has it been a gain, or has it been a loss to the accessibility to the right to health? And one of the key findings that we discovered is that in as much as the Kenyan policymakers and development actors such as the IFC, the World Bank have taken positive steps to fund private facilities to improve healthcare. The key finding that we found is that bad value that adds is that privatization has proven to be more costly for especially the majority of Kenyans who cannot afford the private healthcare. And privatization, we also found that it has more of made the private public facilities to be less preferred, yet cheaper. Public facilities do not have quality medicine, yet they are more preferred and accessible to many people. And so the promise is that the private sector ought to provide value for money, but the reality is that private providers extract profit. The other promise is that private care conserves the scarce government resources, but the reverse is the case. Another promise is private offers high quality care by everybody. And so it's privatization we know has a great impact on the right to health, has a great impact on the aspiration to realize universal health coverage, because in as much as it's an aspiration, it proves to be quite a problem. And so some of the recommendations which we made is the need to prioritize and invest in the public health sector as a path to universal health coverage in Kenya. And there's a need to rethink the support for the private sector. And we note that there are no proper guidelines that are there that have been given to regulate how the investment in the private sector is done, then that leaves room for maybe exploitation. It leaves room for poor procurement procedures. Then there is also a need to improve transparency. And through that, our main recommendation was the need to involve government and private partners. And I'm sure this research mirrors other African countries where the issue of privatization is an issue, privatization within the healthcare and as well as other social economic rights, because as much as it's a promise, the reality is it brings more pressure to the people and it makes healthcare be more expensive. And so there's an opportunity that we have that we can advocate for greater and more accessible healthcare, affordable healthcare to many people, so that the right to health is probably achieved and enjoyed by all the people around Kenya, Africa, and beyond. And so I think we want to stop there and just appreciate the organizers of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clinton, for giving us the brief around the right to health. And just like Professor Ebenezer earlier, there is a thread that is starting to come out about the fact that for many of the jurisdictions, the quality of the services in water and now health is not very good, but also there is a linkage with the involvement of the private sector in being one of the major factors, the liberalization being one of the major factors that is actually taking away from the quality public services that states would otherwise be providing. And it may not be obvious, but increasingly the states are relinquishing their obligation to provide these services and leaving them to the private sector. So before we get into the plenary, I want to call upon Johnston Shisanya to speak to the right to education. Johnston is from Each Rights, East Africa Center for Human Rights, based in Kenya. And then we shall move into the plenary discussion. Thank you very much, Clinton. Johnston, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salima, and I welcome all the participants. Allow me to take you through the right to education as one of our key essential elements that we were talking about here in reclaiming public service. One, I'll begin by saying public services in terms of its definition or understanding is the collectively and democratically determined services developed to produce and deliver public, common and collective goods. This is a realization of human rights, and this is a state obligation that every state, mostly African states, have signed and ratified various treaty bodies which they have committed themselves to implementing and to realizing towards its citizens. So public service and right to education is one of the obligations that our states are supposed to fulfill under the international, the regional, and the national laws. So from that understanding, I want to first of all look at the nature of public services, and so that this can give us a paradigm or an understanding of when we are talking about public education, what we mean. So one aspect of public services that we are looking at is public services are collectively owned. One, they are funded and sustained by citizens' tax. Hence, it's the role or the obligation of the state to make sure that the taxpayers' money is supposed to give the services that are supposed to be provided. Number two, it's a common good. This means that it has to promote collective rights, social inclusion, justice and fairness in the society. This is where we are talking about the marginalized, those who are coming from the poor backgrounds. Are they supposed to receive these services equally, or are they supposed to be excluded? So the common good here is very important for us. The other aspect is the protection of the common resources In Africa and in every country, we have common resources which is supposed to serve all the people equally. And finally, there is the aspect of sustainability. And this sustainability is also embedded in the framework of human rights policies, where we are talking about equality, equity, that services are supposed to be provided equally to people without any exclusions. And these services are also supposed to be sustainable. When we talk about public services, we are looking at it because it's not owned by a particular leader, or it's not guaranteed by a particular leader, but it's supposed to be sustainable because with the change of the regimes, the services are supposed to continue being provided. Looking at our African experience, how do we perceive public services? And in this case, the right to education, how has it been perceived? There are a number of paradigms through which we look at public services, and this has been characterized across Africa. One is the poor service delivery. That when you talk about right to education, we are looking at public services or public education, public institutions are being overwhelmed. The population, the number of children in the classrooms are so high, the teachers are very low, so there is that aspect of looking at public education as poor delivery of services. Mismanagement of resources is another aspect. In any public sector or public services, when you talk to people, they will tell you in public services, resources are being mismanaged. We don't have resources being utilized in the manner that is supposed to be done. Number 3 is lack of transparency and accountability. That public servants don't look at themselves as people who are supposed to be accountable to the citizens. Those who are supposed to be accountable and transparent in everything that they do. The same is happening in education. Something else is inadequate financing by the state. When you look at the budget that is allocated in all our states, and even in Kenya is the same, the number of teachers. Yesterday we are having a discussion, and we had a discussion in media where the Teacher Service Commission was trying to break down the deficiency in terms of the number of teachers that we have. We are lacking resources to finance this. So inadequate financing is a key component that affects public service when it comes to right to education, because we don't have adequate facilities, we don't have adequate teachers, adequate resources to even guarantee the infrastructure that can be able to implement the new curriculum. Finally, there is the aspect of depleted infrastructure. Most of the public services, when you look at the infrastructure, the buildings, they are neglected because there are no adequate resources that can be able to upgrade the infrastructure. And I've talked about even inadequate personnel, even in terms of monitoring education system, there is inadequate personnel. We look at the ministry itself, they don't have adequate people as assessment quality officers who can go around the country to assess the quality of education that we are talking about. So these are some of the key aspects that characterize the public services across Africa. And you go to various countries, you find the same problem cutting across. Now, for us to reclaim right to education in Africa and in Kenya, insofar as public services are concerned, we are saying right to education as a public service, a social contract. And this social contract is one of the things that Kenya or our African states have signed on under the international instruments or treaty bodies, under the regional treaty bodies that we've spoken around, and even within our own national laws. Number 2, right to education is a human right. It's an entitlement. As an entitlement is supposed to be guaranteed to every citizen. Right to education is an equalizer. It's a bridge. It's a bridge that bridges between the poor and the rich. In Africa, we are always seeing this growing gap between the rich and the poor. And unless we address the issue of education, unless we bring all the children on a standardized level where we are saying we are giving them an equal opportunity to competitively see where they can place themselves in the global market, it becomes a problem to address the issue of inequality. So social inclusion and empowerment means we must provide equal quality education to every child. Something else that we look at in terms of right to education, we are looking at one of the key components or the category of rights of the children is the developmental rights, and education is one of them. So children who are lacking right to education or enjoyment of this right to education, they miss out this aspect of development. And finally, the provision of quality education is supposed to be guaranteed in the level where we are talking about holistic development. Holistic means the social aspect, the economic aspect, the cultural aspects are all blended into the kind of education we are looking at. And this is the education that is supposed to be provided in public institutions. When you look at the legal framework that supports public education, we have a number of laws from the international to the regional to the national level that are supposed to guarantee the states to provide these services. One, we have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which we look at Article 26, it guaranteed right to education for everyone. UNESCO Covenant Against Discrimination in Education, the 1960, is another instrument that guarantees right to education. The Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, 1966, Article 13 and 14, guarantees right to education. United Nations Children's Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, the same. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child in 1990, Article number 11, guarantees right to education. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights, or the Banjul Charter, 1986, Article 17, guarantees right to education. The Constitution of Kenya, 2010, Article 43 and 53, all guarantees right to education. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability guarantees right to education. And finally, the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 4, focusing on quality education. All these instruments have been signed and ratified by most of our African countries. And by virtue of them having been signed and ratified, it's now a calling for the states to fulfill that mandate of providing public services to its citizens in a quality manner. Now, looking at the issue of right to education, we have new trends that are emerging, which we are mentioning and have been mentioned prior in water and health. And the aspects of privatization is really penetrating and taking over the role of the state to control and even fulfill its mandate. One, in the sector of education, the new trends that are growing in terms of privatization are for-profit private schools. We have chains of schools which are coming up in the name of telling people we are providing quality, yet for them their focus is on profit. We have the international private schools. The international private schools are for the elite. We call them the elite schools. These can only be afforded by those elite people in the society. They deny the vulnerable and the marginalized, who are the largest population of the African people. Then we have the low-fee paying private schools, or what we call the community schools. These are emerging community schools. They are trying to fill the gap that has been left by the government in terms of providing adequate public facilities in the informal settlements. And there are those even who are adopting a model of homeschooling. And finally, we have those that are public-private partnerships on schools. All these trends play a role in addressing the issue of education. However, we are saying that quality education can only be guaranteed. Sustainable education can only be guaranteed when it's provided by the state, because it's a common good and it's provided under the taxpayers regime. The taxpayers' money has to get its services back. How is quality education being compromised in private institutions? I've already mentioned these trends. And when you look at the trends and you look at the policy framework that regulates right to education, there are a number of challenges that we are foreseeing. And if we don't address these challenges, the future is going to be very pathetic. The quality of education we are talking about is going to be compromised, and it's compromised in a number of ways. One, when you look at the private or for-profit making institutions, they are only oriented for profit. And these are individual ventures. So they don't mind or they don't care whether the poor and the marginalized child get the value of what they need to get in terms of quality education, because they cannot be able to afford to get into these schools. So it's individual and it's profit oriented, targeting only a few people who can be able to pay. And this already is an exclusive aspect of the society that we are saying private actors bring into the state roles of providing public services. Number two is very expensive. Most of the private institutions who are offering education are very expensive. They cannot be afforded. They cannot be afforded by the majority of the African families who are struggling, who are facing a number of challenges, and COVID has come in so strongly, trying to destabilize the economy. So adding to that challenge, we realize the cost of education has become so high. Number three, we are looking at non-adherence to educational standards and policies. In our states, in our governments, we have regulations, we have policy framework that regulates right to education. And most of the proprietors in education, especially the private entities, don't adhere to these regulations. And in Kenya, I'll give an example of the registration guidelines. Most of the informal schools, most of the private actors are not registered. The schools are not registered, and it comes a challenge when it's time for examinations. Now, when you realize children have been learning in a private school where parents know very well that my child goes to a private school, but when it's a time for examination, they are taken back to the public schools where there's scolding and saying there is a lot of population in this school, I cannot take my child there. But their children go and sit for the national examination in the public schools because these are the only institutions that are registered under the National Examination Council, which have the opportunity to provide the children with the examinations. The private schools don't have those provisions. So most of our private institutions are not registered. Most of them don't carry out assessments to understand what is the quality of education that's being provided. The teacher supervision process and development is missing in the private actors. Safety and environmental sustainability is not there. Non-qualified teaching staff, most of them, especially those who are found in the informal settlement where we have the largest population in this country, they have non-qualified teachers because for them, they are looking at how do they reduce the cost of running education, yet they get the capital or the profit out of it. Some of the institutions are autocratically managed. The management system is wanting because some of the institutions are owned by individuals who manage and run and control everything. Some of them offer unstandardized curriculum. And right now in East Africa, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, we are talking about the new competence-based curriculum. The new competence-based curriculum can only be run under the framework where there is policy regulations. Poor infrastructure. Some of them, you look at the infrastructure, the buildings, they are wanting, even the environment where these systems are set up, they are all challenging. And we are saying these are compliance issues. And even when it comes to labor laws, some of them don't follow the labor laws in terms of employment of teachers, in terms of what the labor laws require on employment. And finally, the issue of COVID-19, the experience in Africa has shown us the failure of private institutions or private players when it comes to education. Most of the schools closed down. They converted their institutions into businesses, and most of the children, when schools were resuming, they ended up losing the space. They don't have the schools to take these school learners into the public institutions.
Have we lost Johnston? Johnston, are you still there? Okay, so I guess Johnston got a challenge summarizing his conversation, but I think many of us from the different countries can identify with what Johnston was talking about in terms of what is happening in our public schools, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the quality that is in the public schools privatization is having. And this is the conversation that we are here to have. How do we claim public services as a human right? How do we get our states to understand that these services that they should be providing, and in many cases providing them directly, and how do we get people to also, the ordinary person on the street, to be able to claim for these services as a matter of right? So this is the conversation that we would want to have. And like I said earlier, we've deliberately left a lot of time for plenary such that we get a lot of voices. And like I said earlier, we've been having our conversations within our different countries at the domestic level, and we would want to have a coordinated voice that is engaging in advocacy around public services on the continent to ensure that all our states within Africa are actually paying attention to public services. So we would want to see a situation where we are influencing the domestic level, our sub-regional levels, as well as the continental level. And it is at the continental level that we would really want to have your voices in terms of strategy. What do we need to do? We've talked about some of the things that are happening within the African Commission, but that is not the only space that we need to be in, that we need to be influencing. So right now, I will open up space for plenary. I will request that whoever wants to speak raises their hand, and they do say what they would want to say, and then yeah, we shall be moving like that. For those who do not want to speak directly, please put your ideas in the chat that we have. I already see a hand. Tafazwa, please. As you speak, you please mention where you're from, including maybe your institution and country.
Good morning, Salima. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll be as brief as I can. I would like to congratulate ISERA and its regional partners in holding this seminar. I can relate the presentations from different countries and relate it to my own context from Zimbabwe. I am currently a gender consultant. I used to work with Christian Aid Zimbabwe as a social and economic justice lead. I think moving forward, there's need for human rights organizations and organizations working on socio-economic justice to start working together, especially ensuring that they develop collective policy asks where they can relate the experiences of communities affected by mining and other extractives, and to show how the private sector is not living up to its obligations. There is that need to come up with a concerted effort. Currently, organizations working on different socioeconomic rights are doing so in silos. So I think this platform now is needed now more than ever to ensure that communities start to gather evidence alongside the human rights organizations, alongside other think tanks as well. Thank you, Salima. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tafazwa. You talk about the need for concerted efforts, and we also need to start getting some ideas. What could we do as a group of people and organizations that are concerned about the state of public services on the continent? What do we need to do? I've seen a hand from Timothy Lehman.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon in some countries. Thank you very much. I would like to appreciate all the presentations done. I'm Timothy Lehman, you could call me Tim, from South Africa, the legislative sector, which includes Parliament, the National Parliament, and the 9 provincial legislatures that we I would just want to, I'm a policy analyst in the core business of Parliament, being oversight, public participation, and lawmaking. I would just like to emphasize, and for us to bear in mind, and I think you maybe have already given attention to this, but I would nonetheless like to mention it and emphasize that it is for civil society especially, and for us all to lobby from where we have access to. For instance, for me, I'm thinking for civil society to lobby parliaments, provincial legislatures, and local government councils, to lobby them in the sense that for these members to take their oversight seriously, and so that we enforce more public participation from the public and from civil society in particular, to lobby for these human rights of basic services to be treated as a human right and therefore a necessity which is non-negotiable. So I would just like to give some energy to that kind of lobbying, so that we seriously take up this work and make it known to the powers that be it Parliament, be it local government councils. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Timothy. You raised the issue about lobbying parliaments. I'm assuming you mean, yes, we do lobby the parliaments at our domestic level, but also our sub-regional and, for example, East African Parliament, as well as the African Parliament, because there's also policy being done at that level. I'll now have Bernard. Bernard, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Salim. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Bernard Mohocha. I am from Botswana. I'm getting to this forum for the first time. I just got a surprise email yesterday. I don't know how you guys, I don't know whoever invited me got my contacts. In any case, I'm from a company called Armor Future of Africa. But for today, I'm here as an interested party in this forum. Armor Future of Africa is a business platform. We believe in collaboration. In any case, today, I wish to state that my interest in life is people-centered development. My background is social work, and that's one of my areas of interest. Now, Johnston has generated a very interesting argument. Look, there is a concept that we say a reasonable person. You tend not to understand how, when people are in public institutions, having vowed to do things for the best interest of communities, and they make decisions and regulations which, when they're supposed now to enforce, they overlook such things as having schools in a country unregistered, having schools in countries done outside the rights of children. Our responsibility is supposed to be developing these children to their maximum potential. We're supposed to be doing things, putting ourselves in another person's shoes, whether or not I would accept my child to be in an institution that runs without accreditation, without being registered. Now, time is a resource that has no holiday. If we allow children to spend so much time wasted, at the end of the day, and these people sometimes they pay. How do you pay where there is no return on investment. So surely it is time we need to hold people accountable. If you have a Minister of Education and you have people who are supposed to be implementing policies, and they've got a list of schools that are in a country, and they don't know what is taking place there, surely somebody is sleeping in their job. That is one. Two, in my country, my friend who had just spoken, I think it's Mr. Lehman, has mentioned, I think, local authorities. I don't know whether that's, maybe South Africa call them municipalities. In our country, we call them local authorities, councils. You know, this issue of candidates, in our country, there's a lot of inequality. Whether or not somebody is a quality candidate or not, politicians, because they'll get a seat, they would allow somebody to contest for elections. And once this person has won, this person cannot deliver. Secondly, in my country, people after they've won, what they do is to please communities by way of attending funerals, by way of fetching food, firewood with their weddings. You know, they're doing things that are outside their mandate. So we need to try and have people delivering in terms of the goal. What is it that we said we wanted to do? And hold people accountable about that. I mean, why would somebody think the number of funerals that he attended and fetching firewood to those kind of things are the ones that could account in terms of delivering quality education to my children? So another aspect is ethics. We really need to do much in having people to have a culture of ethics. So that should be a guiding principle in terms of doing things that have been outlined by Johnston as challenges. And I would really encourage whoever started this forum to go ahead, and I'm looking forward to participate in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. You've really raised good points regarding the inequality that is now characteristic of many of our countries, and the fact that it's widening, but that the people we elect into offices are busy doing other things instead of being accountable to the people. And we need to really step up in terms of our advocacy, in terms of making our governments accountable. And this is why we are creating this platform. And we want to see how best, this platform can kind of move in a concerted way in order to influence what is happening on the African continent. Anybody else who wants to provide input? Yes, I see Esther Nakafero. Nakafero. If you're speaking, you're muted. Nakafero Esther Chisache. I see your hand up, but
yeah. Hello.
Hello. Yes, please
Okay.
go ahead and make your contribution.
Okay, thank you so much for the conversation and submission everyone has raised, and I strongly affirm with the advocacy for this. But my concern is on public awareness, Miss Salima. Like, people don't know what their rights are. You can find someone and that person doesn't know that she or he is entitled to such and such a right, that he or she can go and have access to the medicine. So yes, it's going to be there, but people need it more. Like, they need to know more about what's going on and what's all about the public services and which public services are they entitled to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Esther. Yes, you do note that people are not aware about their rights, and perhaps that could explain why there is not so much engagement with our policymakers to make them realize that actually public services are a matter of rights, and probably that is why we are not seeing so much action. So it's something that we need to consider as a group looking into. I want to call upon Sumaya. Sumaya coordinates the Coalition on Public Services in Uganda, and maybe she could share what we've done so far, and perhaps it's something that we need to build on and see if we can also create something like that at the regional level, and that feeds on into the international coalition that already exists.
Yes, thank you, Salima, for taking us through this conversation. And I extend my appreciation still to the participants and the presenters. Looking at, reflect on what we've so far discussed on and engaged on. All these conversations remind me of Amikal Kaba, who once said that we must think with our own heads and we must think within our own realities. And I believe this is what we've essentially been doing since 11 a.m. this morning. And particularly to Uganda, later last year, when we realized how brutal COVID-19 was and how it brought out the unspoken realities of public services being in shambles, being on their knees, we came up with, we formed a movement. It's still in its baby stages, but very promising, on reclaiming public services as a public good. And these services, we've had discussions from the panelists, rights like health, water, and education, among others. Then we've had other conversations at the international level, though what was still missing and what realized as a gap was the concerted discussion on the African continent. Because as we build the Africa we want, as we strategize on what Africa we want by 2063, we needed to learn from other countries and other regions, how are they doing? And this has revealed that we have so many things in common. The public health system is all dead, and we take this moment to reaffirm our commitment to calling on the state to reclaim and fund the public health systems and the public education, provide clean and safe water. So, but how again do we collectively reimagine the Africa we want? And I guess this is the whole aim of this conversation, to reimagine collectively on the Africa we want and work towards that Africa. Thank you, Salima.
Okay, maybe Sumaya, you can share some bits about the manifesto that has been developed for Uganda. There's also a global manifesto, and I thought it would be a good idea that perhaps we could also start working towards an Africa manifesto that then many of us can utilize in the advocacy.
Thank you, Salima. The Ugandan manifesto is enough is enough, and what people want. So I will shortly public document. And also have the global manifesto, and they all have one demand: let's reclaim public services, and let's start viewing them as public good. I'll share the link shortly. Back to you, Salima.
Okay, thank you. I see Alana, you have your hand up. Alana?
Yes, can you hear me? I was trying to, for some reason the network is bad. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, Alana, we hear you.
Hello? But, okay, yes.
We hear you, Alana.
That's it. I wanted to confirm that, I want to just sort of get us back to, I apologize for having challenges connecting earlier, but I wanted to get us back to why we are here. And it's been really good to hear everyone's experiences across the continent. I think we've often joked that Africa is a country. I think when it comes to public services, that's when we see it. So I think that we have to be very clear in what we do in terms of making articulate demands of the Africa we want. You know, when they said Agenda 2063, the leaders said the Africa they want. And they used nice, flourishy language. But the Africans want public services are a central part of it. Because the average African, their first interface with the state, as it exists with the issue of human rights, usually around the issue of services, from when you try to get your child born, or get your kids into school. So I think it is very important that we have very strong demands. A lot of issues have been pointed out today. I think we have correctly diagnosed the solutions. I've been hearing from all kinds of people across the place, and I know others who are trying to get in and are struggling. We're so sorry about the passcode, but I think for us to speak one voice as a movement, we should have very clear demands. Hence why Salima was mentioning an example of the Public Services Manifesto. I think that one of the things we can do is go ahead and have this very clearly articulated, and then use it to influence change, whether it is with our leaders or at the regional level, at the African Union or elsewhere. We're able to use this very clearly. I think there are things that I've had that seem to cut across. For example, we seem to agree there should be free healthcare and education provided by the state. I would want to know what people think there should be consensus around that for water or electricity, but I know that at least for those two, there's been consensus around them. I think we should, the other thing that came through very strongly just listening was sort of, again, issues of financing and the ways in which we've delegated that role. So how it's financed, is it financed through progressive taxation and curbing tax leakages? Because again, as Africans, we're in the same position of knowing that the donor community that we have been relying on is either one, going to cut their funds, and some of them are already insisting on that, or they are changing, because they're also often the ones that are promoting sometimes the privatization of these services. And yesterday we were in a meeting, World Bank meeting on health, and someone, I'm trying to remember the African country, was an official, came and said they were being pushed to work with in a public-private partnership to around issues, and to really involve the private sector a lot around issues of maternal child health and around things around like food for babies and so forth, which they had resisted. They had said we can do them elsewhere, but there's this special area where we really need to keep it non-commercial. But there was so much pushing from the donors, from the UN. So I think it's very important that we recognize again the pressure that is coming. People who should be allies with us in fighting public service that have also been, there's been a corporate capture that has happened there. So I think we need to be very clear in insisting that, one, our governments are financing these public services through domestic revenue mobilization, through progressive taxation, not burdening us, because it's only then that people can demand. You see, when people shout across Africa, they often shout about politicians flying abroad. Why is that? It's because the politician is flying abroad with the taxpayers' money. That is why you can have an opinion if, Mutebile is flown abroad and there is nothing in the hospital here, or Lanya, or seeing other protests again as elsewhere, right? So I think we need to just to underscore, for me, the issues of financing and services being free and the state having to provide them are like four key things we must demand. And then, of course, the issue of making sure they regulate any other actors around this area, because we can't leave these things to the whims of the market. We have seen what has happened. You've seen the research. I know from Kenya to, and we've been seeing what is happening with water and the water privatization and the impact of that. So in every other area, that this must be very clear. So for me, that's a starting point. I would want us to use this time to say the things we agree upon. And then to also identify where our opportunities to compel leaders to do so. I know there is litigation as a mechanism. I know that Judge Muhammad was talking earlier on about this as a right. And that means when something is a right, you always have recourse to the courts and so forth. And I know ICE and other groups on here do litigate, but also sort of where are the opportunities to influence change? What can we collectively do? Because we are doing some of these things in silos, and that means there's a victory over here, then you have to fight again here and so forth. So ideally, we would be doing some of these bigger, actually at the continental level, collectively, to push for change there, and of course continue the pressure like we have been doing, a number of you have been doing in your individual constituencies. So those are my thoughts. And again, just to thank everyone for coming and staying on here. I know a lot of people, like, I'd signed up and I've gotten lots of messages about the password issue. We're so sorry. I think next time we'll make sure there's no password thing at all given at all. And yeah, to leave here with a clear blueprint would be really useful for us right now. Thank you, Salima.
Okay, thank you, Alana, for outlining the issues that you think we need to prioritize, including financing, including the services being free, regulation of non-state actors, and the fact that the services should be provided by the state. We'll wait to hear from other people about those issues, but also other issues that may arise. I see a hand by Flavia. Flavia, please unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you very much, Salima, and your entire team. I'm actually on the road. I had lost you, but I totally agree and concur with what has been shared. But I want to bring in an opponent, an idea about aging, and whether it is for health or education. We have not prepared our systems, or the systems have not prepared us for aging and also planning for age. Whether the health systems themselves don't even talk about aging, particularly when you go beyond reproductive age, the 50 plus. And then from 50 to 60, the government does not plan until 80 in the case of Uganda, where we have the social action grants for the elderly. So we need to see how to bridge programs that bring in, that transition, the transitioning from reproductive age to being elderly. But also the education system does not prepare us for retirement. How do we have an integrated system in education that teaches us that we can go be self-employed or even work in government, but retire and plan to retire? I think these are critical points that we need to integrate in the work we are doing for health and also for education. For health, I think the African Union People's and Human Rights Charter indicates that there is need to empower government to have services for the elderly. But like I said, at country level, we still lack. We have a little bit of bits of and portions about aging, and also talking a little bit about non-communicable diseases, but we are not talking about preparing for this age once you cease to be reproductive, whether for children or productive at work, at public work, or even self-service. What do we do? How do we prepare for that age? Preparing for aging, as in health-wise, but also preparing for retirement in terms of having healthy lives in the older age. So the issue around health financing, we've been making advocacy or doing advocacy on SRHR for young people, for key populations. But I think we need to also start seeing that these young people, I was 30 years ago, a young person, 25 when I was diagnosed with HIV. Now I'm 52. And the system does not even think about me. They only think about that age up to 40. And the education system is looking at you when you are churned out from school, like at 22, 25. And then when you get a job, you're supposed to retire at 65. And we find that many people are not prepared for this age. And government has not put in funds for social security, particularly when people have had a disability as they grow up, or even to prepare for age. I think this is something we need to think about as we plan our health systems, but also our school system. Plan us for now, for tomorrow, and also for a time beyond that which is seemingly productive. You have offered the country your services, and the pension, the National Social Security Fund, the other social security schemes are lacking. So how do we work as governments, as civil society, to ensure that the work we do is integrated to cater for this age? Thank you. I come from AGA. I am the Executive Director, and AGA is Action Group for Health, Human Rights, and HIV in Uganda. We advocate for health financing mainly, but do a lot of other policy and education on health, HIV, and human rights. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to attend this meeting. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Flavia. You raised the issue of older persons, and perhaps now that we are speaking at the continental level, perhaps it's also something that we should be pushing for ratification and implementation of some instruments. For example, the African Union has the protocol on older persons that details some of the rights, including provision of services. And also there's a draft protocol that is not yet adopted around social protection. So perhaps in mapping out some of the things that we could push for at the continental level, we need to also cater for ratification of some of those instruments that do help us in terms of pushing for quality public services, but as well as advocacy to ensure that those that are in the pipeline, like that protocol on social protection, are indeed passed and we ensure their realization. I do not see any other hand. Anybody else wants to weigh in on this conversation? Otherwise, I would go into, if you want to say something, please put up your hand. Otherwise, I will speak to the process that has been happening with the African Commission around the general comment on on state obligations to regulate private providers involved in social service delivery. But if I see a hand coming up, I will request the person to speak. So the plenary is not closed. I'm only going to give that information since I do not see a hand up. So like Justice Mohammed said at the beginning, there has been conversations happening within the African Commission. And here we are giving the Commission as an example, but emphasizing that we need to also reach the other continental organs, especially the political organ of the African Union, but as well reach other entities like the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Earlier, people also talked about the Pan-African Parliament, places that we need to influence to see that we get the appropriate policies that we can use to engage in advocacy within our own domestic settings. So at the African Commission level, there has been ongoing conversations, and there has been discussions around the state of public services, the Commission getting concerned, especially when COVID-19 came up. It was very clear that most of the African states were not ready for what really happened. Our public services were not ready, for example, the public health services. And also there has been an increasing recognition about the role of privatization and the role of involvement of non-state actors in social service delivery, and how much it has impacted access to quality social services, especially for poor and vulnerable groups, noting that there has been widening inequality, noting that the cost of services, a lot of the services are currently commercialized, and we see that this trend is also affecting the public sector. For example, within education, where you see that because the private schools have come up with expensive, with high costs of education, we see also the public sector starting to put non-tuition fees that are affecting affordability of social services. So the Commission initially was engaging individual states around the state of public services in their countries. But then later there was realization that there is need to provide guidance at the continental level, to provide guidance to states on what needs to be done and how to ensure that privatization of services and how to ensure that social services generally are not commercialized, and to ensure that there is access for everybody. So first, the Commission developed draft guidelines on the right to water, and those guidelines are available. I don't know if somebody can help me post a link in the chat. Sumaya or Alana, please post a link to the water guidelines in the chat. And then following that, there was also resolution 420 by the African Commission that specifically pointed out health services and education services, and pointing out that for many countries, there is a reduction in the quality that is being provided by the state, and linking it to the involvement of public services. Then the Commission later came up with another resolution where it charged the Working Group on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights to develop norms to guide states on their obligations to regulate private actors involved in social service delivery. So that process has been ongoing for now 2 years. And the working group has been working with some organizations, including ourselves, ISA, including Dula Omar Institute at the Western Cape, that has also been involved in organizing this meeting, including the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, and then the Global Initiative for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well as the Right to Education Initiative. So those organizations formed the core drafts team that has been working with the African Commission Working Group to develop a draft that the Commission should look at and be able to adopt as a general comment relating to social services in Africa. And where the general comment is at the moment is that there was a call for public comments on the draft. And unfortunately, for those of you who didn't see it, that call has now closed, and there has been incorporation of the comments provided by the public. Different institutions did submit their comments, and now there is a draft that is going to be presented to the African Commission, to the wider group of commissioners in April. During the 71st session that is going to start around April 22nd. And then the Commission will deliberate on whether to adopt the general comment as is or to make some changes before the adoption. We believe that this instrument is going to be very useful in terms of guiding states. First of all, reminding them of their obligation. The content of that general comment, some of it is that states are required to provide public services as a matter of human rights, and be able to provide some of those services directly. But also there are principles like social services are not commercial by nature, and therefore states should do all that is in their power to ensure that these social services like water, health, and education are not commercialized. But also there is guidance on what needs to be done for states that are increasingly adopting the model of public-private partnerships. What kind of institutions would merit entering into a public-private partnership by the state? And in there, it is very emphatic that commercial for-profit entities that are providing services in order to make money should not be considered for public-private partnerships. And also there is emphasis that public funds should not go towards commercial entities that are providing services. And all of this is to ensure that we ring-fence what we have as public services to be able to ensure that these funds that we have available, that is taxpayers' money, should be able to go towards providing a service that is accessible by all, and which is the public social services. All of us know that public health services, public education services are services that are used by everybody, but especially the poor and marginalized people within our settings. So that is the thinking behind what the general comment is doing. But also the general comment speaks to issues of the responsibilities of the private actors in the process. Who are involved. And here it is that if private actors come into the sphere of providing public services, the state needs to impose public service obligations on them. And therefore they must be open to being accountable. They must be open to ensuring there is no discrimination of any form. They must be able to ensure that services are kept, are not commercialized. So the general comment is quite elaborate. Again, we shall be sharing some of this information later, and we are hoping that the Commission will fast track the process of adopting it such that we start utilizing it on the continent to guide our various states on what needs to be done. I saw a comment earlier in the chat. Somebody was asking whether we need to consider forming a coalition on public services at the domestic and at the regional level. I think it came from Dalton Bakashaba. And as Sumaya shared earlier, there is a coalition on public services in Uganda. And for those who are in Uganda, it's for both individuals and organizations. So you feel free to join the coalition. But we don't have one so far at the African regional level. And it is something that this group could speak to, and we see how to move forward. And like we mentioned earlier, there is a coalition at the international level, a coalition on public services that is also looking at issues of water, education, healthcare. And again, there is information on how people can join that coalition. But before we continue, I see that Jackson Wandera, you have your hand up. Yes, feel free to speak. And then we shall wind up since we are almost hitting one of
maybe before you wind up, to be clear, as the
Alana, sorry, maybe you'll come in after Jackson. Jackson had his hand up. I will request you to speak after Jackson. Yes. Jackson Wandera, please.
Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Oh,
hello.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, my network is acting up. Thank you for this opportunity and such a great conversation. A lot has already been said, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on this. That one, it appears that whenever the governments boast of progress in, for example, education or health, they are banking on what the private sector has done in such fields. Because if we are to get down to assess the impact and the contribution to education, the state of education, for example, in Uganda, you'd see that the private sector has played much more because they invest in. And like they said that the private sector is profit-oriented. They don't mind about this important obligation that the state would bear in providing these services. And so in banking, in riding on these progresses, and in allowing the liberalization of these public services to carry on, the state in itself then facilitates this social divide, this discrimination, this inequality, which is not right. And so what I think is that there need to be a revisitation from where it all started. The SAPs, the SAPs, the structural adjustment programs in the early, when the NRM, for example, government came in, and that was the beginning of this mess that we are in, and that widened again and again. And so a revisitation from where we have come from and diagonizing the problem from the beginning would be also imperative, but also to speak to some rights, some services like the right to, like water, for example, the right to access, the right to water cannot be completely provided for by the private sector, and therefore the government needs to step in. And also, on the other hand, with of course the increasing effects of climate change and all that, we find that the private sector is not well placed to address some of these shocks that arise. For example, we've had issues with rains in Uganda, and these have a toll on the access to water and access to adequate food, and the private sector cannot adequately respond to that. And that's why it's imperative that the states have a role to play in the provision of these services. I come from Sironko, and when the sun blares, when the sun blazes and heats up, the nearby well, the one well that serves the entire village, dries up, and it dries up, and people have to wake up as early as 3 a.m. in the morning to go and fetch water, to line up. And so these are all effects of climate change, which the private sector cannot adequately respond to because they don't have the resources and the machinery and the position that the state would have. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to submit on.
Thank you, Jackson. Alana, you can now come in. Bulelani, I see that you are concerned about the fact that we did not have French and Portuguese translation, or Arabic for that matter. Like we said in the beginning, this is the initial conversation we are having. And from the registration, we did not have people who were requesting to have French or Portuguese or Arabic. So we didn't want to put resources to hiring interpreters without knowing whether we shall need to use them. But there are conversations ongoing with Francophone countries to be able to join this platform. So the next meeting we have, definitely we shall be having some Francophonies as well as the translation. Alana? Alana, are you still there? Alana, we are getting to the end of the meeting, and if you're not there, I'm going to...
Yes, I just wanted before we end for you people for us to agree on common demands. I was just asking that we agree on common demands, and by the time we leave, because the conversation I had, people seem to want, for the coalition is one thing which I think people seem to have agreed to do, the Africa coalition, but then also common demands that you want, such that I put them in the manifesto, and we can then work and send a draft for you all to finalize, but at least to have a sense by the time we leave. We talked about financing, we talked about public regulating private. I don't know what else we think we should talk about. But
Alana, there was also mention of ensuring equality and non-discrimination in the provision of the public services.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, I agree with you.
So wants to add to the demands that Alana is talking about, increasing financing. Okay, I see Pat Rowan, Roalan. How do I join the coalition? If you're speaking to the coalition at the regional level, This is the first meeting that we are having, and it's from this meeting that people are beginning to say we need to have the coalition standing. So we shall be sending out emails to everyone who has participated. I'm assuming that you've joined through registering your email. For those who somehow have joined differently, please put your email. Earlier, somebody shared the registration form, and we shall keep the people interested in going forward with this conversation. And like I said, the organizations that have put this together, which is either the Each Rights in Kenya, Hakijami, and the Dula Omar Institute at the University of Western Cape, are interested in taking this conversation forward. So the idea of a coalition is welcome, and we shall be forming that. But if you're speaking to the Ugandan one, then Sumaya shared her email. So you can send your interest to Sumaya. She shared her email in the chat. That is how you can join the coalition. So I see we have hit 13 hours, which is 1 o'clock. And that is when
sorry, just before you conclude, I'm sorry, for one last thing. So we have discrimination, we have financing, we have making sure that the health and education are free. Should others also be free? Should we be saying water, electricity? Maybe those are things people can discuss over email in terms of their feedback. And then I see Moses Sabit is saying regulate private sector fixing prices, setting basic standards. So that is also a key thing. I don't know if there's anything else may have forgotten. The issue of debt is a key one, because I think the rising debt does impact the availability of public services in countries like ours. For example, we spend more, as recently computing, we spend, I think, a third of, basically would be a third of our health budget on payments for debt, on interest payments. So I think we can also, I would also urge that we add that as a point. But I'm also seeing, but I can't pronounce the name, social services should include empowerment of women. So I think the gender lens as well seems to be coming through strongly, because since in effect, when you realize public services, you empower women. When there's no public education, it's girls who suffer, and the women, of course, we know what happens at home. So, okay, that sounds great. If the other specifics you all would like to see here, we'll pull together a draft and send, and then have this document. And the other bit that did not come through as strongly, I thought, were what could be next steps. Maybe we have to have another meeting. This was an introductory meeting to just sort of reflect, to think about what the next steps could be in terms of where are the fault lines for advocacy, right? At the regional level. At the national level, I know you all do, and we may have to sort of self-popularize it. And just also mention that we shall link it to the IDA also involved in a broader global public services campaign. And we have a manifesto also with that regard, which we can also share with you in the email that follows. I think Sumaya will have to share with you both the country and global one to give you sort of a sense of the demands. But for Africa in particular, when we're engaged with a global one, we realize there are things that as Africans we need, like we will not compromise on, like the issue of free health, free education, because sometimes you have discussions saying, does the government have to provide in the global one? I would say, knowing the conditions of our people, we must make sure that we have things that actually will help them. So just to, at least thank you. This has been helpful, even just seeing your comments and chats coming in. If anyone wants to add something, please feel free to speak now. I will collect everything together and send a document.
Okay, thank you, Alana, and thank you, everybody. I will take a hand that for somebody who would really want to say something before we close. But just for me to summarize, we heard from the start what has been happening from Justice Mohammed, what the African Commission has been saying. Then we had the various speakers around health, water, and education. But the common threads that were coming out was the fact that there is the state of public social services in our countries is still wanting, and the fact that private involvement in many cases has had negative impacts on that. Then in terms of the demands that we need to have, like Alana was saying earlier, things that have been coming through was increasing financing for public services, and related to financing is the resource pooling. How are the resources gotten for funding public services, which would entail things like progressive taxation, which would entail things like a discussion around public debt. How do we handle that? But also the other demand is the elimination of inequality and discrimination in the provision of social services. And there is the issue of social services being free at the point of user, then regulation of non-state actors involved in social services, ensuring that these services are not commercialized, and the fact that some of the services will have to be provided by the state. There is a lot of nuance to what needs to be done. There was also discussion around gender, persons with disabilities. There is a lot of nuance, like Alana was starting to say, that, for example, if we say health and education need to be free, should we say the same for example, water and electricity? But that will form the next steps discussion. And Alana, you are also asking about what needs to be done, like how we shall be advocating at the regional level. And the suggestions that have come up is, first of all, that we need to form some kind of coalition, something, it may be loose, but some kind of group that is willing to push this forward at the regional level. By region, we mean the African level. And then people suggested that we need to also have a manifesto at this level that we use for advocacy in our various countries. So in terms of the manifesto, that is what Alana was saying, like in sharing the outcome document with all of you, she will start to share what the manifesto could look like. And we would come back in the next meeting just to discuss those demands that we could put in what we call a manifesto that we use for advocacy. But in terms of what we need to do to advocate, again, there were some suggestions that came up. There was a suggestion for litigation that came up. There was a suggestion for advocacy with parliaments, and it was noted at the national level. We also do this advocacy, but we need to take it also to the sub-regional and the regional Pan-African Parliament level. There was a suggestion around awareness raising to ensure communities do understand that they actually have these rights. They have a right to accessing quality public services, and they should be able to demand. So maybe some kind of campaign that raises awareness around quality public services as a human right. And then there was an issue around pushing for ratification of instruments that are already adopted that are relevant at the African Union level. For example, the protocol on older persons, the protocol on social protection, and then pushing for adoption of those that are in the pipeline. But also lastly, there was discussion around targeting the various organs, both the human rights and the political organs, looking at the African Commission, the Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, but also institutions like the African Union Commission, and then the African Court and the Pan-African Parliament. So this is what I had from this conversation. And once again, I want to thank everybody for being here for 2 hours. We started at 11 o'clock, and we still have good numbers here. So thank you, everybody, for being here and for staying here. We shall be sharing
Maybe just to add one thing, sorry. Someone mentioned working groups, regional working groups within the broader coalition. And I thought it would be a great idea, maybe to add as a way forward. I think it was more, I saw someone in the chat, because we could even do them by block, Eastern, Southern, or whatever, that then feed, because I've seen that in the global movement we did, having regional groups sometimes helped move the work forward.
Okay, so thank you, Alana, for the addition. So in terms of the next steps, you will receive an outcome document. If you haven't shared your email, or if you didn't register formally for the session, please share your email. and you will receive the outcome document. The next steps, like I said, we are going to speak among the organizing entities, and we see when to hold the next meeting, which should discuss the manifesto, and then get into the detail of the strategies that have been shared. We really hope that everybody who's been here does show up for the next discussion, because now we are beginning to have some kind of conversation, and we need to have a big force that is speaking from all parts of the continent. And also the suggestion that we have the Francophone and the Lusophone people joining the conversations. Like I said, we are trying to reach out to the Francophone organizations and the Lusophone organizations to see to it that what we do have is a truly continental voice that is speaking about public services, quality public services as a human right on the African continent. And we really do hope that we shall be able to achieve this. So thank you once again. Bye for now, and we shall be in touch with with the dates on the next meeting that we shall have. Thank you, everybody. And once again, apologies to those who are, for one reason or another, not able to join, or who joined late simply because they were struggling to get onto the platform. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye.